All right, hello everybody. We're really pleased to be here today to do this educational course of the OHBM. We're going to talk on part 5, open publishing and peer review. So it's just some introductions. First off, my name's Ginny Barber. I'm the director of Open Access Australasia. I'm based in Australia on the East Coast in Brisbane. And I'm also the co-lead for the Office for Scholarly Communication at QUT. I've been involved in open access for quite a few years now, and I've been particularly involved, for example, at the initiatives such as PLOS Medicine. Over to Cooper.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Cooper Smout. I did my PhD in the neuroscience of visual awareness at the Queensland Brain Institute. Since graduating about 2 years ago, I've been moving into the open science space and working on a number of projects, which I'll tell you about at the end of this presentation. And excuse me. And I'm an independent researcher affiliated with the Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education.
Fantastic. All right, so what are we going to cover this time? We're going to talk about open access, the essentials. We're going to talk about preprints, where they sit in the publishing landscape, and again, why you should care about them. We're going to talk about some models of peer review that you should know about. And then right at the end, we'll come on to some radical new alternatives in openness. And we hope that this is going to inspire you to get engaged in open science and open access, demystify it, make it seem not quite so scary as some people think about it, and give you some practical tips that you can take along with you as you make your work open. And as we go along, there'll be some QR codes that will come up at the end of each section, and we'll pause at those points and would encourage you to scan the QR codes and answer the poll that's associated with each one. Okay, so first off, open access. Here's a poll. Have you made your work open access? So I'll pause here for a moment, grab this QR code. We will also have these at the end in case you missed them right here, and have a go at letting us know whether you've made your work open. All right, on to the next bit. So I just want to talk about openness and where it sits in the open access, or where open access sits in the openness landscape. Open access is just one part of it, but it might be the part that you've heard the most about because it relates to journal publications, which are, of course, the currency of scientific research most commonly. But there's a whole range of openness that you've probably heard about within this course as well, which include open methods as you actually do your research, using open source software and code. Really importantly, having ways to share your data openly, and that's a very important part of the open landscape. But it's also associated with open peer review, which we'll touch on, and increasingly the development of open educational resources, which are, again, a really critical part of the open landscape. And in particularly, as we move to try and have a more equitable open system, open educational resources are important. But to make open educational resources, you actually need open access publications in the first place. So just think about all of this as a landscape that sits together. And just really how we get to have things open, again, it's not, they don't sit on their own. We know that we need a whole of system approach for open access. So for example, in countries such as the Netherlands, where open access has been part of the conversations for many years now, there are very strong policies at a very high level. We know that we need policies not just at a national, but also at institutional and funder level. And in Australia, where we are, our two funders have open access policies, and they are a very important driver of how researchers behave. But underpinning that is also infrastructure. So for example, we need to have publication and data repositories. Most institutions globally have their own repository, which is associated with their, which their researchers can use. But we need investment in that infrastructure, and that also includes journals, and we'll talk a little bit about journals as we go into the next bit. One of the most important things that I think we also need to see is the need to have reward and recognition for making your work open, and there's a whole body of work going on there, which includes work from DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, and the initiatives such as the Hong Kong Principles. And also, I think it really importantly needs international action. 2021 was a really exciting year because UNESCO adopted an open science recommendation, which was unanimously adopted by all the members of UNESCO. And as part of that, open access sits within it, but it's underpinned by values and principles, which means that we want to have a thriving open access ecosystem that is equitable and provides support for whoever wants to make their work open. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at it. There's some great resources, and it's going to be a real driver of behaviour going forward. But the problem, I think, that for lots of researchers is that open access terms can be really confusing. There's a few terms that you might have heard of, which I'll just give you a chance to have a look at here. But essentially, they range from making your work open via a repository, which is often called green open access, making your work open via journal, which can be called gold open access. That's when the journal is fully open access, and that's journals such as PLOS or Biomed Central. A subset of the gold is the diamond or the fee-free open access, and that's a really important part of the landscape that organisations such as Coalition S have done a mapping exercise for, and have demonstrated that these are a critical part of our open access globally, particularly in underserved populations and where there is real niche publishing. And as we move to a more open world of open access that's particularly supported by publishers, for example, we need to be really mindful of the fact that we don't lose these academic-led journals. Because there are some real challenges around openness that's led by publishers. You might hear the term hybrid open access, and that means when an article processing charge is paid for an individual journal to be made open, where the journal is otherwise a subscription. These are highly problematic unless they're part of read and publish deals, and these are being negotiated globally. And it's just worth being aware of the terms associated with these and whether or not you can participate in them as a researcher. But however you make your work open, there's some really core bits that you just need to be aware of. So open access has never been about just free availability of a PDF on the internet. It does include free availability. That's very important, and it should be immediate. But it also requires and is part of that includes the retention of copyright by authors, the reuse rights retained by the authors, and author attribution rights. And that's usually made possible by applying what's called a Creative Commons license. And that's what you can see on the right hand here. And the terms of reuse are specified. And the one that you can see here, the CC BY, that's called a Creative Commons attribution license. And that means that anyone can use your work, but they have to attribute it. And that's actually the license that we've applied to this talk as an example. So that's the kind of the basics. So let's just talk a little bit about experiences and tips for neuroscience. So I would say the couple of things just to remain thing that you think about: retain your copyright and understand open licenses and why they matter. And we'll provide some links to that at the end. But Cooper, what do you want to talk about neuroscience open access journals?
Thanks, Jenny. So I thought I would give my experiences as an early career researcher on publishing in neuroscience journals. Basically, the first thing is that every paper that I've published has been made green open access. So this means that I've uploaded the final version of the article to one of a number of preprint repositories and also my university repository. But then I've also published in a number of open access journals that charge fees. So I've published in PLOS Biology and we've published in eLife as well, and a couple of others that I can't bring to mind. But those are two that I'd really highly recommend. They're obviously like the higher tier of journals that you can publish in, but they had a really good review process. I really enjoyed both of the processes publishing there. I also want to highlight that OHBM has just come out with a new publishing platform called Aperture. And so this is just starting to get going and something that we could all support as being part of OHBM. But yeah, the thing to highlight about all of those journals is that they do come attached with a publishing fee, which is obviously not ideal for all researchers who don't have the resources. And so one journal that I really want to highlight is a newer one that I haven't published in because unfortunately I wasn't publishing when they were getting going. But Neurons, Behavior, Data and Theory is basically a diamond open access journal that's targeted at the neurosciences and has a really amazing review board and editorial team and is really starting to build some momentum. So if I was to still be publishing in neuroscience, that's absolutely where I would publish my next article. And also just finally to close off that there's a really amazing resource called the Directory of Open Access Journals, doaj.org. And in there you can search and filter for whatever parameters you want. But just the other day, I did a search for open access journals that don't charge a fee. in the neurosciences, and I found over 120 options. So definitely worth checking out that resource and seeing what's available. And then just finally on the last slide, I think there's a link to a Twitter thread that goes through all the various options that neuroscientists and also psychologists can use for fee-free open access. So would encourage you to check out that thread and check out those journals, because we really should be supporting these fee-free options moving forward if possible. Thanks, Ginny. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And I think just the thing to take away from this as a researcher is there are always options to make your work open. And if you're not sure where to go, one of the things I would definitely say is talk to your university librarians. They've got great advice and experience in this area.
Yes, librarians are our friends.
That's right. Okay, all right, on to the next part. So we're going to talk about preprints now. So first off, here's another poll. I'll give you a moment to do it. We'd like to know if you've ever posted a preprint.
What about you, Jenny? Have you posted a preprint?
I have posted preprints. I've also read many preprints, which I'll talk about in a bit. But yes, and it's actually an incredibly sounds scary to do, that you're putting work out in the open early, but there's some real benefits that I'll chat about. So the first thing to say is that preprints are not new. So this is a great picture that I took when I was lucky enough to go to CERN, which is where that huge particle accelerator is. And this is actually the original preprint server. So back in the 50s and 60s, scientists, physicists used to send CERN a physical copy of their paper. And when other scientists wanted to look at it, CERN would photocopy it and they'd send it off by post to the other researchers for feedback. And it was actually an incredibly thriving ecosystem. And one of the things I think it tells us is that often the advances that come along are built on previous communities that had a specific way of working. They've just adapted to the online world. So preprints are not new. And if you ever get a chance to go to CERN, I'd encourage you to go and have a peek in these filing cabinets. But what we now know today is preprints are really a thriving alternative publishing system. So this is just a list of some of the preprint servers, and these are listed as a group called ASAP Bio. I've just taken a grab of the first screenshot from the first page. And what you can see here is that there are many different, associated with many different fields and many different types of processes. So for example, the top one, AAS, includes, for example, basic scientific research. The SAGE preprints is humanities and social sciences. So people often think preprints are just associated with the basic sciences, and that's obviously not the case. And the third one at the bottom is Africa Archive, which is for all academic fields, but it's run specifically for researchers in Africa. So you can see there's a huge diversity and opportunity to publish preprints. So why should you post a preprint? I mean, I think that we often think that this is to do with getting a social benefit. You know, there's a huge advantage in getting research out quickly, and I'll follow up on that in a second. But actually, most of the reasons for posting a preprint provide a benefit directly to researchers. So you can establish your precedence with a preprint, so you can make sure that you don't get scooped by others. And most journals now have a process for you when you submit your final paper to a journal, that you have a way of linking to the preprint, so you can establish your precedence. You can establish your copyright and retain rights, and that can be really important. For example, if you've got figures that you've developed, you've made them open access through the preprint. As I showed in the slide before, you've retained your copyright on them and you've retained your attribution rights. You can use those figures wherever you then go on to publish, even if it's in a subscription journal, because you've already got the copyright and it doesn't pass over to the journal. It's really, another one is that you get feedback ahead of journal submissions. So this is really important. And again, talking about communities that do this very well, the British Medical Journal has long had a process of having feedback on papers. And although you might think that medical journal preprints have been problematic in the past, actually, you can get very thoughtful feedback on them. That's my field, medicine. And then the final one is that you get increased attention to the final published paper. So, and that includes increased citations. So there's often a feeling that, you know, people say that preprints steal citations from final published papers. That simply isn't true. So, but where do preprints really come into their own? Well, yeah, obviously the pandemic was a huge driver of that. The slide on the left comes from a paper that looked at the very early days of the pandemic, really the first few weeks. And you can see that in the top part, when the pink line shows when the pandemic began to take off. The middle bit is what happened with publishing. So the pink is the journal article and the blue is the preprints. And the bottom panel shows what all these preprints were composed of. So what was really interesting was there were a whole range of different places where people were posting their preprints, which range from medRxiv, which I'll talk about in a second, through to places like OSF preprints and SciArchive, and even ResearchGate, which really is not a preprint service. So just please don't post your preprints there. But what you see on the right was that in particular, medRxiv just took off in an exponential way. So I was ended up being one of the people that provided advice to medRxiv during this really critical time when they were moving from having a few preprints a day to getting hundreds a day. And they were an incredibly important source of information when literally information was changing day to day. And people needed to know things like, for example, what was happening with screening of sewage in particular areas in particular weeks. Results that would be useless if they were allowed to take 6 months to get out. It was almost real-time publishing, and it was an incredibly exciting and really important piece of infrastructure that was established by Cold Spring Harbor and the British Medical Journal. And I think it was one of the most standout successes of publishing really over the past 10 to 15 years. But as we know, preprints have had some bad press. I would just say to you, if you're thinking of posting a preprint, there are now very well-established ways of doing it. So you can post a preprint on bioRxiv and medRxiv, for example, and that will feed directly into many journals. Most journals now will accept publications that have previously been submitted as preprints, even in the humanities and social sciences, provided you let them know. And there's some real opportunities to do kind of quite complex linking backwards and forwards between the preprints in a way that's very useful. But Cooper, you were part of a group that did some work on looking at preprints in the pandemic. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. This was a paper we published last year where we analysed actually a few different stages of the publishing pipeline and problems that had come up or been made visible through the COVID pandemic. But for the discussion here, the main part that was interesting and relevant is that we looked at the use of preprints in the media and also media mentions of these preprint platforms that you can see on the right. And like you showed on that slide previously, there was a huge surge in the use of preprints. But unfortunately, along with that came a lack of understanding and awareness, particularly in the media and journalist communities, about what preprints actually represent and the fact that they're not peer reviewed yet, so they can actually contain significant flaws. And so unfortunately, this then led to a number of high profile cases where preprints that were flawed in nature got spread very widely and in the end amounted in real world deaths out there. So I'm thinking of the hydrochloroquine situation in particular. But our conclusion is that not that preprints are a problem in themselves, that the benefits vastly outweigh the negatives. But what it means then is looking forward, we really need to shift the focus onto educating the public, but also educating journalists and the media and how to treat these sources of information differently to peer-reviewed articles. And then secondly, also what we really should be doing is looking into more rigorous ways to evaluate the quality of preprints so that we can eventually get off the journal standard and move to a more free-flowing dynamic system.
Fantastic. That's exactly right. And I think that, it's really worth having a good look at this paper because it gives us some really important ways forward. We know that, there's going to be medical emergencies coming in future that we're going to have to address, and preprints will have their part in that.
Absolutely.
Okay, on to the next. So that last section is open peer review and other innovations. So here's another poll for you. So have you ever done or received open peer review? Cooper, have you been part of this?
Yeah, I haven't done open peer review, but I have received it via the eLife paper that we submitted. But maybe we can chat about that at the end.
Yeah, great. And I think why it's worth just chatting now is that because obviously often with younger researchers, it's not something they've experienced, and there are some real people have had some concerns about it. So let me just talk about the types of peer review. So there's double-blind peer review, which is when neither the reviewer or the author knows who each other are. Most common in humanities and social sciences, but does also occur, for example, some medical journals. Single blind is most journals today, so that's when the reviewer knows who the authors are, but the authors don't know who the reviewer is. Then there's open, which is at selected journals, so that's when both authors and reviewers know who each others are. The BMJ was the British Medical Journal, was a very early innovator in this and actually ran trials on this, or ran a trial on this. And what they found was that there was no real difference in the quality of the peer review, because that's something that people are sometimes concerned about with open peer review, that you only get uncritical reviews. And they also found that there was no difference, or very little difference, in reviewers accepting whether they would do the peer review. So that's kind of interesting, because often people think, well, it's a bit scary to do open peer review. There is transparent, so this is open and also includes the reviews being published, and F1000 has been an innovator in this area. And then there's eLife, and that's a journal which we'll talk about a little bit that in the end, where the peer review is collaborative between the reviewers. So the real thing we want to just really highlight here is that there can be challenges in doing this type of peer review. I often hear that early academics, for example, are very nervous about doing open peer review because they feel like it puts them in a difficult position, potentially criticising more senior colleagues. I've personally both done open peer review and had received open peer review. I would say that I'm very careful when I write my reviews. I mean, I hope I'm always careful when I write my reviews, but I am especially careful when I write open peer review. And in fact, my policy is that I won't do any review that I don't sign. I'm not interested in doing reviews that are anonymous, because I think that it doesn't encourage good behaviour generally amongst reviewers. But I fully acknowledge that I'm relatively senior in my career, so it's not going to be problematic for me. But Cooper, do you want to talk about your experience of having open peer review or collaborative peer review at eLife?
Yeah, so I really believe that eLife is the most progressive journal in this space. Their process, the real benefit, I think, to me, is that as an author, you get a coherent story. So the editor is actually collaborating with the reviewers. They're all discussing each other's concerns. And it means that then it's just a lot easier to action and respond to the concerns that the reviewers bring up. Because I think we've all been there, at least those of us who have published, where we've got multiple reviews back, and sometimes they can even be contradictory. I've literally had one paper where 2 reviewers said I should take 2 completely opposite approaches in a particular section of the paper, and that didn't get caught by the editor. So then you're just left in this, like, what do I do phase. Whereas, yeah, the sort of collaborative approach means that you can be part of that story and really co-create something with your reviewers, rather than be this back and forth antagonistic process. You mentioned F1000. Have you got experience with that, Ginny?
Yeah, I have. And the process with F1000, which incidentally is also the platform that some funders are now building their journals on. So, for example, the Wellcome Trust in the UK, the Gates Foundation, and also one of the European funders. So essentially what happens there is you submit a paper, it goes up immediately, so a bit like a preprint, you might think. The reviews happen publicly, so the editors invite reviewers, but you can also nominate reviewers yourself as an author. And they provide the reviews, they post them, and then you edit. When you revise the paper, that second version gets posted up alongside the reviews and with the authors, with the reviewers' further comments if they decide to do that. So it's really a kind of the beginning of what we'd really like to see, which is an evolving publishing system, which means that even at the time of the review process, it's not static. And you can click through and see the different versions of the papers. And I think that's an incredibly valuable process to do. And again, it's the kind of thing where you think it might be kind of quite scary to do, but the Wellcome now finds that most of the research from their researchers is now published in the Wellcome Open Research platform. So it's clearly a model that their funded researchers are really collaborating in. So with that, let's just go on to some radical openness. So this is Cooper's favourite topic, and he's going to talk to some of the there are fantastic things that are kind of happening in this area. So over to you, Cooper.
I think the first one was something that you wanted to mention. It's a new innovation in Australia. If you can just click through to that one, Notify.
Oh, yes. So the Notify project is something that's happening, that's led by the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. And this is where they are looking to build on repositories, the information that's deposited within them, to build on top of it a review process and also a way of linking to other objects. It's just getting started, so watch this space.
Great. And so that's a great example of an independent platform. So what I mean by that is that it's not tied to any particular journal and potentially could become a new publishing and communication system in and of itself in the future. And there's all kinds of great examples of this. So I've put some logos up on the right. Ones that are relevant to us are Peer Community in Neuroscience, which is basically a collaborative process that replicates a lot of the journal review features, but without being tied to a particular journal. Pre-review is a preprint review platform where you can review absolutely any preprint that's been published. And a great feature that they have is that you can be pseudo-anonymous. So as an early career researcher, you can put up your reviews and have it attached to your sort of online identity, but then that could never come back to you as a researcher. And Prelights is another great platform that basically provides highlights of biological papers that the community feel are worth highlighting. And so if you can click through, Ginny, the next platform is called Reimagine Review, but this is a really great resource that basically allows you to filter and look at all of the range of experiments in this space that's being led by ASAP Bio. So that's a really powerful way to find different ways that you could look at to find open reviews and also contribute to these platforms. So the next feature is modularity. So there's a number of projects that are proposing that instead of having this static paper that gets published, like Ginny was mentioning before, we should really be moving to a more dynamic, ongoing review process so that information can get updated with the latest evidence. And so that's what these platforms in particular, the other element is that instead of just publishing an entire paper, we could also publish along the life cycle as we go. So this means that you might publish the introduction, then you might publish your hypotheses, your method, your data, and every step of the way you could get feedback and create this a much more dynamic, involved, collaborative process where people can jump in to the bits that are relevant and potentially review those bits as well. So some great projects I just thought I'd mention are Octopus, and Research Equals, which are both taking a similar sort of approach to breaking down the research life cycle. And then there's some really exciting work in the decentralized space. So the one I'm quite fond of is Research Hub. And basically this is aiming to move towards a decentralized science. So the idea that we don't need these central gatekeepers like journals and even potentially universities to communicate information, but using blockchain technologies, we could potentially communicate within the research community more directly and more efficiently. And so then I think I mentioned the dynamic nature of all of these platforms. They're also all free. So they're all trying to get over this idea that we need to pay large sums of money to either read or publish research. And I thought I'd put this last feature as fun because that's something that we're trying to create on this new project called Open Heart and Mind. And basically that's in the back end, it's developing a new system for scientific communication and evaluation, but the front end effectively is a festival that we're throwing. So it's an open science festival. And the idea is that if we can get people together and start enjoying this process of creating a new technology, then I think we'll be able to get a bit of a critical mass going. And so the last point I just wanted to bring up is that all of these platforms are doing amazing things and really deserve our support. But at the end of the day, it's one thing to build a revolutionary technology and it's another to get people to actually use it. And so sometimes what we have in adoption of these platforms is a collective action problem. And so there's a platform that we've been developing for the last few years called Free Our Knowledge, which is aiming to bring a critical mass of support for these platforms so that we can kickstart their value and get them going in the community. So if you want to check out that, we've got a number of campaigns to support some of these projects and many others at freeourknowledge.org. I think that's it for this slide, Ginny.
Yep, fantastic. So this is our last slide. And I guess the thing that we just want to say here is that, firstly, I hope this was useful. But whatever you're doing in the open access, open science space, you're not alone. There's a whole number of groups that are working here and great opportunities for you to get involved, whatever your kind of interest is. We've put our contact details here and we'd love to hear from you if any of this has kind of grabbed your interest.
Thanks, everyone. And we've got the QR codes on the last slide so that the facilitators in the room can bring up those results and have a discussion about what you've heard here. Thank you, everyone. Hope you found this useful.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.